Well, hi, guys. Good to see all of you. If any of you knew David back at Williamstown, back in the 60s, you realize he bloomed early. If you knew me, I might have bloomed a little bit later. But luckily, we both bloomed where we were planted here in New Orleans. My theme is more about places and people of hope. New Orleans is obviously a place of hope. Who the hell would have built a city here in this low, swampy area? Turns out it was a perfect place at that time to put the city, and the only good place on the river they could find. People of hope just came to me. David was talking about Andrew Higgins. Much like Bill with Microsoft when he pitched IBM on what he could do, Higgins didn't have a built boat at the time. He pitched a concept and a promise to the people at the Navy. And he got the order by promising he could have X boats by X period of time. He came back to New Orleans and they literally commandeered 3 blocks of a street called Terpsichore and built boats, because that 3 blocks had machine shops and a bunch of stuff on it, but it also had houses that people lived in. Those poor people had to live with 24-hour lights, noise, grinding equipment, hammering rivets and all that good stuff. But Higgins got the order. So New Orleans has always been a place of hope with a lot of people with hope. I'll talk about some of my places. When I first got to New Orleans, well, I was born in New Orleans, but this was my first playground. City Park is an absolutely wonderful urban park. It's 1,200 acres, bigger than Central Park. It's got 13 miles of lagoons, which is what attracted me to it at first. I love to fish, always have. City Park was founded on private philanthropy. It was improved during the Depression, Works Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps. Only 1 mile of the current lagoon system is natural. That's a natural thing called Bayou Metairie. 12 miles were hand dug, shovels, wheelbarrows, and rakes by guys in the 30s that were working just to get something to have to do. Apparently the best job to have was the guy that with the wheelbarrow that took the dirt they were digging out of the canals to make the canals, the lagoons, and run them up a wooden ramp and dump them somewhere. How you got that job was to know a baseball player for the old New Orleans Pelicans, get his old cleats, because without cleats, you were going to just slip getting the wheelbarrows up. The job with the wheelbarrows paid 12 cents an hour more than the other jobs. It was considered the best job. My involvement with City Park later was as an incubator for urban kids, giving them a contact with some kind of active environmentalism. They might not have known they were having active environmentalism at the time, but we were planting a seed. Another place I've spent a lot of time is Pontchartrain Conservancy. If any of y'all have been following stuff for a long time, like we've got a classmate, Bob Bendick, has been with the Nature Conservancy. We were best known as Save Our Lake. We got started on one simple environmental issue, which was the pollution that was happening in the lake due to something called shell dredging. They were digging a clam out of the bottom that was used a lot in making parking lots and cement and all that kind of stuff. But they were ruining the lake and doing it in any number of ways. A grassroots organization said, we got to stop this, and literally was able to do it over a period of time from the ground up. It wasn't a tops down deal, it was a ground up deal. Over time, Save Our Lake, Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation has turned into a conservancy model now. And we've grown into a multifaceted, science-based, nationally recognized actor. Currently, we're an agent of science-based practical solutions to challenges of coastal land loss, resiliency, and really importantly, learning how to live with water in sustainable ways. I don't care much where you live in this United States, unless you're maybe in Nevada, but even they are having to learn either with water or without water. This is something we've all got to get better at. Presently, Pontchartrain Conservancy focuses on science, education, advocacy. What you see here is a bunch of Cub Scout, Boy Scouts in our lighthouse at our museum, but we also have an awful lot of outdoor activity for them. I have currently more hope about the future than I've had in a long time. And it's because I've been basically retired now for about 20 years. And the more I do volunteer work and some other stuff, Pontchartrain Conservancy even convinced me to get on the board and be board chair, if you can imagine that. But I'm finding younger generations very invested and more invested. I'm finding many schools now have active outdoor program involvement. Some of my favorite programs, number one, is Coastal Roots. Coastal Roots is really unique. It takes students as young as second grade up through high school. They're taking part in a project to grow and learn about and become environmental students. And the way they do this is they help establish some native plant nurseries at their local schools. On the left, you see a picture of these, they're basically tubs that have a specialized insert. It's got a bunch of holes. In the holes, you put these tubes. In the tubes, you put the seeds. Then you fill it up with some kind of growing material. And eventually you get either the grass or the trees you need to put out into the marsh to hold the marsh together better. The dominant grass is called Spartina. 50 schools statewide are now doing this literally on their campuses. They grow them out. My old school, Newman, and a school called Country Day that you're going to hear about a little later are in that number. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, I was contacted by the dean of students at Newman. It was the morning of the ceremony where the fourth graders were going to hand a sample number of these little tubes to a junior in the high school who the next year was going to go out and actually lead the team that planted them in the marsh. I asked him, why are you calling me? Well, you know all these people at Newman. The little girl from fourth grade is not going to give them to the guy as a junior. And I said, why? He said, it's the fourth year we've done this, as you know. I helped them get it started. She's found out from the people from the previous classes, nobody ever told them thank you, especially the senior high school kids. Can you do something? The kid that's going to get the things, the junior, was going to be the captain of the football team. I knew the old football coach. I called him. He called the kid. Amazingly enough, the kid said thank you. It all went forward.
If they hear it, they'll say somebody's making a lot of noise.
Excuse me, John, if somebody hasn't have their microphone on mute, you should put it on mute so we don't have background noise. Thank you. Sorry, John.
Okay, thank you. Another program that's fairly similar is called GrowDat. In New Orleans, dat means that, okay? D's are TH. It's located in City Park. It's utilizing a space that when I was volunteer director at City Park, there was 15 or 20 acres. It just was doing nothing but maybe holding water when there was a heavy rain and useless between. Some visionaries saw what it could be, and now it's a full-scale growing operation. Their mission statement says they're nurturing a diverse group of young leaders through the meaningful work of growing food. They grow about 35,000 pounds of food a year. 30% of that is donated to Shared Harvest, which is a bunch of organizations that get it to places needed, food kitchens, etc. You might see a common thread in these two organizations. It's to get young people out and about and away from screens, into nature with their eyes open, getting their hands dirty, but applying what they're learning and they're knowing from those screens and in the classrooms, and learning as they go, as they get out there. David's involved in something that goes far beyond high school. Tulane Law Clinic there has an active environmental section where university students have an impact, an incredible impact at a number of levels. They help nonprofits like us put together position papers. They actually have helped put together briefs that have won cases. It goes from second grade to law school, and hopefully some of these kids in law school go beyond. I'd like to talk about how Williams is involved in this and still producing. These are two young men. On the left is a guy named Augustin White, and this is Devin Parfait. I'd heard about Devin, but I'd never met him. I'd never met Augustin. I met them both at a local alumni event on Mountain Day. We've got a really go-getter head of our local alumni group. And she had us get up on top of the only thing in New Orleans that's even close to a mountain. It's a 50-foot man-made hill in City Park, made from some stuff when they put the interstate through the park. So it's not particularly pristine, but it's there. Augustine is the class of 2003. He got, and I've vetted this with both of them, so that this is fine. Augustine got to Williams on a pretty normal path. He went to a good school in Connecticut. He got good grades. He got good test scores. He got accepted. One of the reasons he thinks he got accepted was he went from 0-16, ninth grade, high school, to 30-0 as a senior, as a wrestler. That may have had something to do with him getting in, he thinks. He's done some other things along the way, but he's presently the upper school principal at that Metairie Park Country Day School that I talked about back in the Grodat part. He is actively involved and totally committed to expanding his school's community outreach. He's quite a young man. Young, I mean, he's 40-something. Devin Parfait is a very recent graduate, class of 2022. He got to Williams on a completely different path, very different than any I've ever heard. He was born in Dulac, Louisiana. Now, David was not born in New Orleans. He was born in Thibodaux, which is below New Orleans. Dulac's way below. Dulac's literally ground zero of where the largest land loss in the United States is going on right now, South Louisiana. In fact, for a number of years, it's the largest land loss continuously going on in the world. Devin knew at 12 he was going to be a chief of his tribal community. He went to local public schools, certainly not the best. He was able to get to a local junior college, which is now a full college, called Delgado in New Orleans. He did very well there, and he was able to be sent to a conference. At that conference, a William professor and some students saw him give a presentation. The professor saw potential, talked to him, mentored him, tried to help him get accepted at Williams. First time around, he wasn't accepted. But Williams, I think, to their credit, worked on offering him a path to admissions through the Mystic program in Mystic, Connecticut. Devin took full advantage of that opportunity, got in his second pass. He's developed media and GIS projects with the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Everything he's done has focused on tribal community impacts of coastal land loss. He's putting it all to good use back here in Louisiana currently working as a coastal resilience analyst with something called the Environmental Defense Fund, Mississippi River Delta Coalition. Both of those two outfits are adjunct partners of ours at Pontchartrain Conservancy. If you want to read something really cool about Devon, you can dig it out of this link in the Williams record, which is still a pretty good rag. So in New Orleans, I see a community of hope with a lot of progress and Williams involved. That's it.
Good. Stay right there. I'm going to scoot up here and get us out of the screen share. And while I'm doing that, I will play off of something that John just said. He was talking about the accents here, dim, dat, dees, and those, which may sound somewhat familiar to those of you from the New York area. John very appropriately referred to one of our local streets as Terpsichore. That would not get you recognized in New Orleans. Here, it would be called Terpsichore. And likewise, Melpomene is called Melpomene. Straightforward enough. And I think my favorite of these is Clio, which is rendered in New Orleans as CL10. So that's my local commentary about New Orleans accents. So turn it back over to Arthur, who's probably been keeping a long list of people who wanted to break in and comment on whatever we had to say.
Well, we don't have any hands raised electronically, so I think we'll go with the number of people who will just jump in and ask a question. Now, I just want to tell people there is a little recording. This is being recorded, so you see the recording button on the upper left-hand corner. So if you're talking, realize that you're being recorded and this could blow up your political agenda. So keep that in mind. Anybody, so who wants to start it off? Somebody's got to start it off. Howard, you have a question.
I do. There's actually two. One is a culinary question. So I'm sure that David and John are well versed in this. There's a restaurant that I used to go to when I visited New Orleans called Le Ruth's in Gretna. I think it's across the river from New Orleans. And is it as good as I remember it, David and John? Does it still exist?
Yeah, well, you remember my comment a little earlier? It ain't there no more.
Yeah.
Regrettably, LaRousse has bit the dust.
Yeah, the old man was named Warren, and it may be said that the kids didn't want to work as hard.
But we still got a lot of fine ones.
Well, this is Bram. I'm recently bought a place in New Orleans down the street from John, right off Magazine Street. So maybe next time I'll have some New Orleans lore for you.
This is Mike speaking. I just want to say to David, please thank Jane for all your hosting of us when we were there, especially in that pelting rainstorm. What's great about tonight is I see I have to come back. We haven't seen it all.
We hope to get that done for everybody.
So, John, this is Jeff Palmer. I'm curious about what's happened in New Orleans about the mitigation efforts after Katrina. I mean, is New Orleans going to be around in 100 years, or what's happening down there?
My simple answer is yes, we'll be around. There's an awful lot going on with something they call learning how to live with nature. Some of the best minds, and one of them's our age, a guy named David Wagner. He's recognized all over the world as how to build great things in bad places. He's been commissioned to, do all kinds of stuff out in the Mideast and so forth. But one of his mantras is the Mississippi River has 1 billion tons of sediment go by the foot of Canal Street daily. 1 billion tons. It gets out to the Gulf of Mexico. It's full of nutrients. God bless Iowa corn farmers and everybody else, but it's full of nutrients from the grain belt, etc., and creates dead zones. We are presently way down the road on developing what are called diversions. In the old days, before there were levees along the river, you had spring floods that would, come up and dump new soil on top of the old soil. Our soil down here is always compacting. We live on a sponge cake. So if you don't replenish the soil, you're going to sink. When the levees got to be really serious in the 1920s, particularly after 1923 or 6, we didn't get replenishment from the river floods anymore. Now we've developed ways to, I'm not a scientist, and if y'all are, don't laugh at me, but simply said, it's to poke a hole that's well designed in a levee and take some sediment from the river at appropriate times and let that sediment go out like the fingers of your two hands and make marsh. That's very simplistic, but that's what it's about. It will work. It's been proven to work. It's working naturally in a place nobody ever thought it was going to happen. So with all the best science minds, it's going to work better. So we're going to be here.
So New Orleans is challenged, South Louisiana for that matter, but one of the important lessons I learned in the wake of Katrina, within a year or two after it had devastated the city, was just how threatened a lot of other places that you might not think of are. USA Today did an article that reported on the 10 most vulnerable from the standpoint of Corps of Engineers infrastructure. And top of the list was Sacramento, California, because it's where two bodies of water join up, and their protection against flooding was at the time considered to be very, very vulnerable. People assume that New Orleans was built in a kind of a dumb location. It's not actually below sea level. Better than half of the city is above sea level, but parts of it are definitely susceptible to this rising seas and compacting soil, as John said. It's a double whammy.
David, a
great uncle
question.
of mine developed the pumping system that drained the city. He did it for public health reasons. When he retired, he was asked, "What's your fear?" He says, "My fear is that the politicians are going to realize now that all this swampland is being pumped out, they could maybe develop it." If you look at the worst damaged lines after Katrina, they literally are outside of my great uncle's pumps. He never expected it to be developed, but he knew it would be.
David, I was going to ask you a question. You're like a walking history of New Orleans, which is great. Both you guys know it well. I read a book recently about how Aaron Burr was charged with treason, a big trial. He was acquitted in the city of New Orleans when he was he claimed he was going to take over the Western territories and maybe Mexico. So I'm wondering, do you have confidence for the future that kids growing up in New Orleans are really embracing their past, really can get a sense of the sweep of history that you have?
Yeah, I share John's optimism. I mean, every city waxes and wanes in terms of its good fortune and its challenging times. But I think there's so much, one decision I've not regretted was deciding that I wanted to make New Orleans my residence, and it's been rewarding. Jane and I will drive down one of these oak-covered streets with the canopy above at night coming back and say, how fortunate we are that we live in New Orleans. So like every city, it's got its challenges, but I think we'll endure. Oh, and if you're looking for a good book to read, I brought it with me on a trip to Moldova. I figured I will never get through this big fat book unless I'm trapped with it somewhere. And it proved to be just wonderful and very engaging. John Barry's Rising Tide is about the flood of 1927. And it's about
Great
so
book.
much more than the flood. It's about the social context and the first Rex, who was Jewish. It took quite some years thereafter before that was repeated. And the gown for his wife cost $10,000 in that day's money. I think it was an extraordinarily prosperous area. It was when cotton was king in the 1870s. So John Barry's Rising Tide is really a superb piece of work. Recommended.
I want to say that this was superb. It's great to see you guys. I learned a lot about New Orleans. Everybody that knew me from Williams knew I was kind of sheltered. I guess I still am. I've never been to New Orleans. I always thought it was getting drunk on Bourbon Street and watching topless women, which I'm not particularly adverse to, but it wasn't enough of a motivation to get down there. Now it sounds like I'm all pumped up. I got to make a visit. I'll look you guys up. But that was a wonderfully informative presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, Bob Bendick, if you're still on the call, your name was mentioned. I was wondering if you wanted to add anything.
All right, let me unmute myself and here I am, and Jill is here with me. No, I thought it was a great presentation, and New Orleans is, have for the last 8 years worked on the Gulf of Mexico and restoration and conservation across the Gulf, and New Orleans and actually the state of Louisiana have developed an incredibly sophisticated approach to saving New Orleans and saving the marshes and reversing the decline of South Louisiana. It's impressive and thoroughly based on science and public input. So I get to go to New Orleans a lot. I'm going to go there next week. And it's not only the cultural center that they talked about, but New Orleans and then up to Baton Rouge is a place where there's great thinking about how to shape the future in light of climate change. So great presentation, fun to see it.
Hey, Arthur, I have a question, which is you said it's being recorded is it just audio recording, or is this whole video recorded too?
We're gonna have to consult the Tulane group for that.
It's the whole enchilada.
Oh, great.
We went through 2 years of teaching on Zoom, and it gives you both the visual and the audio.
There is no NIL though, okay? No NIL.
But I'm serious. I'd sure like to see it again before I visit. Are we going to be able to have access to that recording?
Yeah, we'll make sure that Arthur and Bob have it to post and give people an opportunity to see it if some just didn't want to take a look at it.
I think one thing that this brings to mind is how much we missed that trip that was that trip to New Orleans that was canceled because of COVID. And it really means, if we could plan another trip like that, it would be really great, because this has sort of sparked the interest of everyone who was in attendance here. And I mean, are there any more questions? If they're not,
Arthur, just one thing, Mike Hurley, if you do plan a trip to New Orleans, one of the things that Penny and I found is this World War II museum. They say you got to spend 2 days there. That's an understatement. It's an amazing, deep thing if that kind of history really, is something of interest to you. So factor some time in for that if that's of interest at all. Of course, that means more than 2 days, because there's so much more to see, as you just saw from the presentation.
Yeah, hey, it's Peter Sartorius. So speaking of that trip a couple of years ago, it's Peter Sartorius. Speaking of that trip a couple of years ago, just by happenstance, Barbara and I had some miles that were going to expire, and I still had Dave Marcello's great guide to New Orleans that he did for the trip. So we decided to just come down here for a few days. So actually, we arrived in New Orleans this morning, and
Great.
staying for a few days. And, I just, John and Dave, thanks for that presentation. I got a few notes here on other places to go, although I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to go to all these places. We're definitely going to go to the World War II Museum tomorrow. So, but it's fascinating. We had a good walk around today and are looking forward to till Friday.
Well, great. I'm I'm easily gotten by email, dmarcello, all one word in lowercase, @tulane.edu. So be happy to help curate some of the visit while you're here, and I'm sure John would as well.
Okay.
Definitely would. And please remember, you can come back. We love tourist dollars.
By the way,
Well,
Alexander
another-
Kasky, I'm sorry, Alexander Kasky, our webmaster, reminds me that we certainly can post this on the website, which will be very helpful.
One thing I'd like to add, if I can, Bob was tremendously helpful to me a few years ago when I was a blooming chair who had no idea of how to run an organization like that. He was fabulously helpful. But it brought to mind that Williams was way ahead of the curve. We had the environmental studies with Andy Sheffy in that yellow brick building that ain't there no more. But long before most schools were even dreaming of doing something like that. So I'm really proud, not only to be a Williams graduate, but of Williams now. They're doing things like letting Devon have a way to get there that are just, they're cool. That's all there is to it.
I totally agree with that. And one of the things that I think was, well, two things that distinguish this presentation is, one, the technological ease with which it was done. It actually proves that those people born in 1964 could actually do this stuff. So thank you, guys, and thank you, Tulane. And the other thing is that I really enjoyed the sort of spirit of this presentation because both of you brought a lot of good cheer and hope of the future. And we need a lot more of that these days, because when we're listening to the news, we ain't getting any of it. And so thank you very, very much. It was really a terrific presentation.
Yeah, it was great.
And,
Just great.
Great work, guys. Terrific. Thanks.
Yes.
and so we hope to see you
Great job.
all in a few months, except for Mr. Palmer, who's going to be in Sicily. All right. Good to see you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Al.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care.
Au revoir.